Hello, my name is Sebastian Stoneham and I live full-time in this van. It's a 1985 Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalia, and recently my girlfriend just picked up an 84 Westfalia. And in this video we're going to go through the process that we went through to fully install a cheap Chinese diesel heater into her 84 Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalia campervan. The Chinese diesel heater has been a staple when it comes to winter camping and just winter van life survival for the past couple of years now. And that's mainly because of how affordable they are. In full-on winter conditions, they perform extremely well when installed right. When shopping for one of these diesel heaters, I like to use Amazon. And yeah, there are a ton of different options like name brands, and you got the 5 kilowatts and the 8 kilowatts. I've used both versions, and as far as performance goes, I haven't seen a huge difference when it comes to those two. I've used diesel heaters since the first winter I camped out in my van. That was like 7 years ago. And ever since, I've been living off and on in this here van full time. And yeah, the diesel heaters are my favorite, but there are a few different options like electric heaters or propane heaters like the Mr. Buddy. But the only problem with the electric heaters is they pull a lot of power, like more power than you're willing to cram into your Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalia camper van. And as far as the Mr. Buddy heaters go, they're great. They produce the sufficient amount of heat to be able to stay warm in the winter months. However, it's a wet heat, and you could run into a few problems with those. They introduce condensation into your van, and we don't like condensation. They also pull oxygen out of the air, and if you don't have a carbon monoxide detector, then you could run the risk of running out of oxygen inside of your van because it uses an actual flame inside of your van to produce heat. One big question that I've been asked throughout the years is, where do you come up with the diesel when installing a diesel heater into a gas-powered vehicle, such as the Volkswagen Vanagon? My girlfriend's van here is the stock 1.9 water boxer engine, and that's what I had in my van when I bought it as well. When I first installed my diesel heater so many years ago, I actually ran a fuel tank behind my driver's seat. The diesel heaters that you order off of Amazon, they actually do come with a fuel canister, sometimes 10, sometimes 15 liters. And those are made for the heater itself. It's kind of designed that way. And some of the units you'll see have it all contained in a convenient little carrying case. They call those the portable units, but we want to permanently install this heater inside of this van today. I'm sure by now a lot of you guys have come up with your own ways of installing the cheap Chinese diesel heater into your Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalias. And I'm not saying that my way is the perfect exact right way to do it, but I've tested it throughout the years of owning it in my van, and it's just worked. And it's worked in some of the craziest conditions, like throughout all the northwestern states, even in British Columbia and the Yukon. I even had this up in the Arctic Circle, and I saw temperatures like minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. These heaters do in fact fail, and they fail at the worst times. I want to show you guys what I do to mitigate those issues. There are a few options where you can mount the fuel can that comes with the diesel heater itself. My first thought was behind the driver's seat because it's convenient enough to open your door and stick the diesel nozzle inside and fill your diesel can. And I had mine installed there for a few years and it did just fine. The only downside of having it installed there is you'll have to flip the van around when you're at the gas station to fill the diesel can after filling the gas tank. Because on the Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalias, the two-wheel drive ones are designed to be filled with gas on the passenger side of the vehicle. Another good option would be to mount the fuel tank inside one of the cabinets here. You have a few options below the stove and sink area. You could pull out the stock Westfalia refrigerator, the one that doesn't work, or when it does work, it doesn't work very good. A common thing that people do is rip those out, and there's a few companies out there that have kits to eliminate that refrigerator refrigerator. In doing so, it opens up a huge space. So you can mount a diesel heater in there. You can mount all sorts of things. And with installing a diesel heater into this van, this completely original 1984 Westfalia, that was my first thought, is to rip the original refrigerator out and use the conversion kit to do so and install the diesel heater fuel can inside of where that refrigerator used to go. But then we started looking at different options. And one that really intrigued me was having the fuel can on the outside of the van, actually on the back swing out. And after looking around the van where we could possibly mount this fuel can, the decision we ended up making was that we would add a jerry can to the back swing out and run the fuel line and fuel pump all the way back there. I will say this is not the best option. There are a few downsides. One of the biggest downsides is being that we're using these heaters in middle of winter, and with diesel, it actually gels. Now for a normal size fuel hose, the amount of gelling would not be an issue. But because the diesel heater has a smaller diameter hose like this one, any bit of gelling will clog it. So we want to make sure to run some anti-gel in there and be very diligent about it. Last winter, I had my diesel gel in the small diameter fuel hose for the diesel heater, and I believe inside of the fuel pump for the diesel heater as well. It gelled at temperatures as warm as -10 Fahrenheit. So just keep that in mind. So instead of using the fuel canister that came in the diesel heater kit, we opted for a Rotopax jerry can. And the only reason we went with that is because this van came with a Go Westy bumper and Go Westy swing out already. So getting the Rotopax jerry can was a no-brainer, and we ended up getting a cheaper mount so we could just bolt it straight to the swing out. These yellow Rotopax jerry cans are designed to carry diesel fuel. And since I've installed a few of those nipples on the normal diesel heater cans, I knew installing it on this jerry can wouldn't be a huge issue. And yeah, since this Rotopax jerry can is mounted on the driver's side of the van on the swing out, we run into that same unfortunate issue where we have to fill up on gas on the passenger side, flip the van around, and then fill the diesel can with diesel. Installing the diesel heater under the bench seat on an original 1984 Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalia poses some issues. The biggest issue is that in 1984, from the factory, it came in with this inline heater that uses the heat from the engine coolant to heat up the heater core and blow hot air for the passengers in the back. However, after 40 years of neglect, these heaters always leak. So it's extremely common to pull these heaters out just for the extra storage space, even if you aren't installing a diesel heater. 4 bolts hold on the cover and only 2 bolts hold the heater down. With those removed, we can move to the underside of the van and splice these connectors in to replace the T's that are already there. This job is a messy one, especially when you're dealing with the van that hasn't had much issues or maintenance over the past 40 years. I start by jacking up the van to give me a little bit more headroom under the van. I'm using some vice grips to stop the flow of coolant through the heater hoses. The hose clamps that have not been touched for 40 years are very difficult to remove, so I had some hose clamps that I knew worked really well standing by. Once these connectors are spliced in, I cut the hose with the T connectors behind the firewall, and after doing that, we could just pull out the heater. Now that the original engine coolant heater is fully removed, we plugged these holes with the necessary plugs provided by Uniworks Design, then used a hole saw bit that we had laying around and cut some pretty big holes in the floor. And while I was doing that, Ray was working on the heater itself and getting it ready by installing the exhaust hose, intake hose, and fuel hose. With all that secured on the heater, we could drop it into the 2 holes we just drilled. I like to run the heater hose towards the driver's side of the van because I feel like it has more room on that end. The diesel heater kit comes with all the necessary hardware to mount this securely. We drill 4 self-tappers straight to the floor of the van. Some of the wiring provided might not be long enough, so I used the original engine coolant heater wires to extend the wires for the controller. I ran the wire for the controller here. I like to mount it right here on the side wall, on the side of where the stove is, and I run it from the heater and it connects right here through the back end of the bench seat, through this crevice, out this little crevice behind the outlets here, and that'll pop it out under this cover. And then I could just pull it to the back of this cabinet, run it through the back end there, and then into behind where the refrigerator is. Once it's there, I could pull it up through here very carefully and through this vent for the refrigerator without having to remove anything. Now that the wiring for the controller is situated and the diesel heater is fully installed, we could move our focus to the diesel fuel tank that we'll be mounting on the back of the van. I start by drilling a hole with the drill bit that's the same size as the nipple. Then I run a wire through the entire fuel tank to try and pull the nipple through. And fair warning, this is extremely tedious and will drive you insane. Once the nipple is pulled all the way through, you could install the provided rubber O-ring to the outside of the jerry can. And once everything looks like it's snug and it's not going to leak, you could tighten down the nut with a 13mm socket, just tight enough to squish that rubber O-ring, not too tight, or else you run the risk of tearing it and leaking diesel fuel everywhere, and you don't want to leak diesel fuel everywhere. Since I removed the original coolant heater wiring, I already have a nice hole with the grommet on it to pull the diesel fuel line through. Then I run the diesel heater fuel line to the back of the van. I drilled a few small holes right next to the back hatch seal. I did this on the driver's side because that's where our swing out is located. I'll be using silicone to hold the rubber hose and wire securely so we don't have any rubbing issues. Now there are many different ways to mount the jerry can onto the swing out. I just did what's best in this scenario. And having the fuel pump as close as possible to the source of fuel is the best practice when it comes to these diesel heaters. I'll be cleaning up the wiring and the root of the fuel hose in the future to ensure it's not in the way of the rear deck lid. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this install and I think it looks pretty professional. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of is the wiring, and the fuel hose is kind of dangling here behind the van when the swing out is in and fully secured. I think with some wire sheathing or conduit, it'll tidy it up a lot more. As for the diesel heater, all is left to do is run the heater hose to where you want to blow the heat. Luckily, Uniworks Design has a solution for this that replaces the original framing for the engine coolant heater vent. Now I can splice in a male cigarette lighter plug so I could power this with the Bluetti. Unfortunately, I was not able to get the cigarette lighter plug to work in the Bluetti. I spliced it into the diesel heater wires and plugged it into the Bluetti, and it just kept pushing out and not being a reliable source of power. So what we ended up doing is pulling out the 100 amp hour battery from another camper. We threw it in here and got the negative and positive wired straight up to the battery. There is nothing charging the battery. There's no DC to DC charger, or no solar charge controller. It's just a fully topped off battery that we just threw in for this diesel heater for now. We will add everything else later on, and we'll be using the Bluetti until we could get everything else installed to power this battery. As you can tell, the diesel heater is running. It's actually on full blast right now, and it's pushing out some crazy hot air. It's like an overpowered hair dryer. It's got the clean air going in and clean air going out. It's dry, and that's exactly what you want. I haven't zip tied the wires or the fuel line up at all yet, just so I could test it out and make sure everything is happy, everything's running before I button everything up and make it permanent so I don't have to touch it again. As far as the controller goes here, we have it on, this just shows P12 is 12 volts coming out from the battery. This screen right here is 0011. It's been running for 11 minutes. Shows the temperature in Celsius, I think inside and outside. You can set a timer to turn on and turn off the diesel heater itself. H6 is just running on max power. It goes like through 1 through 6, and you could go into this here and set other settings. I don't really know how to use this controller at all. I believe this is 240 Celsius coming out of the heater. You might be able to change it to Fahrenheit. I have no idea. I just know this button, this button, and this button. This turns it off and on. This turns the number down. This turns the number up, and it just works. I believe you can go in here and set a high altitude mode, because we are sitting at about 5,000 or 6,000 feet here in western Montana, and it just likes to operate at like a reduced fuel for these higher altitudes. I don't believe I've ever even done that with my van, and it works. If I don't have to worry about it, then I won't. We still have it running on full power. I just wanted to show you guys what it sounded like from the outside of the van. So here is the fuel pump ticking away. It's the infamous ticking fuel pump. We have it right outside of the glass window here where our heads are going to be sleeping, and we could hardly hear it from inside, which is really, really nice. I believe I need to angle this fuel pump a little bit just so it stays happy. We've got it coming out of the Rotopax diesel can here through the line here, and I've got the wiring just taped up here, and it's going into the 2 holes that I drilled right there, and then these are still loose. They're not being bound by anything. I'll probably clean that up a little bit, put the sheathing around it just so it looks like a cleaner install. As far as the exhaust goes, I told you guys I like to run it on the driver's side because it's just closer for where the diesel heater is sitting on the inside. So I run it right in front of the driver's side rear wheel. And usually the exhaust there is further towards the end of the van, so I might try extending that here in the future just so there's not an excess of exhaust buildup underneath the van. I would like to have it sticking out just a little bit if I can. And then you probably won't be able to see it, but up under there is tucked up behind this frame rail here is the intake. I want to tuck that up as much as possible because with snow and ice driving on the road, it likes to cover everything. And if you drive on a snowy road for long enough, you'll get a lot of ice buildup underneath the Westfalia here, which is not a good scenario when you're pushing or you're trying to pull fresh air for the diesel heater through that intake. And the exhaust will ice up as well, so you want to make sure that's free and clear of ice before running it, or if you are running it while you're driving, then yeah, just keep an eye on your ice buildup because it'll clog it up and you'll end up with a lot of white smoke everywhere. Standing on the outside of the van about 5 feet away, you could definitely hear the fuel pump and you could definitely hear the exhaust, but it is not too loud. If you're stealth camping on the side of the road in a city and you walked by the van, and mind you, this is on full blast, like fully high, it does get a little bit quieter when you have it on like H3, like the midway setting. But since this is a camper van, I mean, if you got the top popped up and everything, people are gonna know that you're camping in it, especially if you're parked on the side of the road and you got the full setup and you got the heater running in the middle of winter. In the middle of winter, there's no one walking on the side of the road anyway, so who cares? On the inside of the van, you can't hear the exhaust. All you can hear is the fan coming out of the diesel heater itself. So closing the bench seat, yeah, all you hear is the fan. And if we turn this a little bit lower, because you're not going to have it on high for very long, because this will get this small area really hot. And though it does have a lot of windows in here, you could put like reflectix like I usually do in my van. I'll have the back 3 windows full of reflectix all winter long because they just ice up anyway. And obviously with the top popped up and the window covers open, it doesn't hold as much heat as with the pop top down. If you have the pop top down like when I had my pop top, it would stay a lot warmer inside of the living area here inside the Westfalia. Also, another good hack here is what I would do between the driving portion of the van and the living portion of the van. I would put up a quilted blanket blocking off the driving portion of the van because I'm not trying to heat up the driving portion of the van. I just want this back area to stay warm. I wanted it to stay around 50, 60, or even 70 70 degrees Fahrenheit when it's negative 30 degrees outside, which is not easy to accomplish. So that's how I install a cheap Chinese diesel heater inside a 1984 Volkswagen Vanagon Westfalia camper van. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more like it, I'm going to be building out my van over the next couple of weeks. I'm actually doing like a 30-day van build to try and get the engine in order, the transmission good enough, and doing a full build out on the interior here on my Westfalia. So I'll be taking out all the Westfalia cabinets and building my own thing. But right now we have the engine and transmission out of the van. That'll be in the next video in a couple days. So if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. I'll see you guys next time.